this short series, we've been talking about the 5 marks of mission, adopted by the worldwide Anglican Communion. The fourth of these is to seek to transform unjust structures of society, to challenge violence of every kind, and to pursue peace and reconciliation. Brazilian Catholic Archbishop Helder Camara famously said, "If you feed the poor, they call you a saint. If you ask, why are they poor? They call you a communist." Because he did ask those questions, he was under suspicion and opposed by the military dictatorship, as well as by traditionalist forces in the Catholic Church at that time. The key to understanding the fourth mark of mission is to realise why it's different to the third. The third mark is about caring for those in need. The fourth asks, why are these people in need? And how might we change things so that they're not? It is inherently political. And as we embrace this fourth mark of mission, we will always upset those who think the Church should stay out of politics. Living in the UK, we may not have to face a military dictatorship, but we may still face ferocious opposition when, for example, we question government policies that we believe are unjust. The Church of England Birmingham's own community regeneration work through the organisation Thrive is shaped by the same belief, which has often been described to me in terms of, it's no good just pulling drowning people out of the river, but we also need to head upstream and find out why they're falling in the first place. A very practical example of where we might ask that question and be ready to challenge unjust structures is the case around food banks. Many of our churches have set up food banks over recent years and have seen ever-growing need for their services. This is third mark of mission stuff, responding to human need with loving service. But there's a troubling question to be asked of why we should need food banks in the first place. Why are so many in this country falling into food poverty? And indeed, is there a danger of encouraging complacency in government and wider society if we simply help to alleviate the situation but do not challenge it? We don't want to be in danger of helping to prop up an unjust system by not attending to the fullness of the mission that God calls us to. Alongside the call to transform unjust structures, there's also the call to challenge violence of every kind and to pursue peace and reconciliation. Our world currently feels a very violent place, and it's easy to feel helpless as we hear of conflict in other parts of the world. But there are other forms of violence closer to home, which the fourth mark of mission also urges us to call out. For example, violence against women, the rise of domestic abuse, the abuse of children and vulnerable adults, the violence of hate speech and prejudice of every kind, and many other examples. In order to challenge these in wider society, we must of course also make no room for them in our churches. Transforming unjust structures, challenging violence, pursuing relationships of peace must start with how we live with one another. The biblical call through both Old and New Testaments is not simply for God's people to be prophetic in what they say to the wider world, but importantly in what they do. So as well as asking some of the following questions of our society, we need to ask them of ourselves. Why are some people excluded and on the margins? Some suffering prejudice, inequality, poverty, or lack of opportunity? Perhaps because of their UKME GMH heritage, their gender or sexual orientation, their disability, age, class, or background. It's interesting that Jesus' strongest words are often aimed at the religious of his day, just as the words of the Old Testament prophets are directed to God's people, and where injustice has crept in to how they live with each other. So how do we, as the Church, need to respond today as we take to heart the call of the fourth mark of mission? That might be a conversation you want to start in your own church community. How can we live out more courageously the fullness of kingdom faith and kingdom mission that Jesus proclaimed? Jesus often berated the religious leaders of his day for being blind to what God really requires. And what does God really require? This is summed up powerfully in the words of the prophet Micah: to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.